Clashes with police and clashes of agenda seem to define the G20 Summit in Toronto this weekend, at least if money media coverage is anything to go by. Were the differences among the world leaders who control 85% of the world economy really so great? And how does Obama's encouragement of stimulus spending abroad jibe with deficit talk back here? Also, a jobs bill failed, but some sort of financial reform legislation finally got green-lighted as Blue Dogs and GOPsters came together. Will it make a difference? We'll talk about it with The Nation magazine lead writer on a recent issue on inequality, author, GRITtv economics correspondent Dean Baker. He co-directs the Center for Economic Policy Research in Washington, and he's joining us by Skype. First this, Obama in Toronto.
But the point is that in each country, what we have to recognize is that the recovery is still fragile, that we still have more work to do to make this recovery durable, but we also have to recognize that if markets are skittish and don't have confidence that we can tackle the tough problems of our medium and long-term debt and deficits, then that also is going to undermine our recovery.
Dean Baker, can you explain to me why the president seems to sound so different in his talk abroad than what he's actually doing at home?
Well, we aren't seeing much by way of stimulus in the States. I mean, we had, of course, President Obama's stimulus that he passed last winter, and that was something. But, I think it was clearly too small. Many of President Obama's advisors thought that at the time, and I think it's even more clear today. It was too small. But the real problem going forward is that it's been largely discredited, I think, in the public mind. That people have very little sense that it really helped the economy. I mean, I would certainly argue it did, but that's not the general view out there. And there's been this big counter push by the conservatives, by the Republicans, and some blue dog Democrats. And we can't even see unemployment benefits extended right now. So it's good to hear President Obama go to the G20 and talk about stimulus, but the reality is he's having difficulty getting anything through Congress. We're seeing the opposite now. We're seeing anti-stimulus, both from Congress, but more importantly, all the state and local governments that are cutting back right now.
Were the differences between him and the German leaders and the French and the British really so great?
Well, I think there are differences there. I mean, they've really embraced this idea, whether they believe it or not, who knows, but at least publicly, they've embraced the idea that deficit reduction has to be at the top of their agenda. And President Obama has certainly given some lip service to that. He did appoint his deficit commission, and he has talked about doing various types of, possibly cutting Social Security and Medicare. I mean, that's clearly on the table, at least with many people in his administration, if he hasn't said that directly. So he's given some lip service to that, but he hasn't taken the steps that they have done to actually look to rein in their budgets in a very short-term horizon. So I would certainly say he is saying something different than what, say, the leaders of Germany, France, and most of the other G20 countries are saying right now.
Let's talk about financial reform. Here's Barney Frank talking on the Rachel Maddow show as the financial reform bill, so long awaited, seemed to finally get the green light.
Working with Maxine Waters and Mel Watt, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, we were trying to get $2 billion to help people who are now $3 billion for people who are now unemployed and can't pay their mortgages, not because they made poor judgments, but because they happen to be living in a time of high unemployment. We got cut back to $1 billion. I'm going to try and get another $1 billion of that. On the other hand, we did get an independent consumer bureau. We got the Volcker rule, which months ago people thought we wouldn't get. We got it with some slight changes. Blanche Lincoln's position on derivatives and banks won, which it should have. We have laws in there now that will make it simply illegal to give poor people the kind of loans that led them into financial ruin and ruined neighborhoods.
Dean Baker, are you as hopeful as Barney Frank there?
Well, it's certainly a mixed bag. I'm actually not upset they didn't get more money for those loans because I think more of that money goes to banks than to help the homeowners. But that aside, the other issues, the Consumer Financial Products Protection Agency is definitely a good thing. I certainly hope that President Obama will pick Elizabeth Warren as the first head, the main point being that it's someone you can count on to take a strong stand and be a real spokesperson for consumers. She would fit the bill. I don't know, there's another Elizabeth Warren out there. So that's probably the biggest thing in the bill. The Volcker rule was watered down. This is preventing banks from basically engaging in risky trading. There's some restrictions on that. I think they'll largely evade that. We will see derivatives being traded mostly on exchanges, or at least on being cleared, which will be greater transparency. So those are definite gains. But the big failure here, at least in my view, was we didn't break up the big banks. We still have banks that are too big to fail. I don't know any economist who thinks that we would just let one of the big 6 banks go under. So if they were to face trouble, they would be bailed out, and that's a really big drawback. And the other thing is, at the end of the day, I don't think we've changed the way Wall Street does business, which to my mind would have been a high priority.
We'll talk about who gets bailed out and who doesn't. The unemployed were hoping for an extension of unemployment benefits. That got voted down, as you mentioned earlier. Here's Dick Durbin of Illinois talking about that on the floor. And then I'm going to come back to you. You wrote a lead article recently for the nation's special issue on inequality. As far as I can see, that's going to go from bad to worse, not the nation issue, but the inequality. Here's Durbin.
We have been limping and dragging our way from one short extension to another, and that isn't fair. It isn't fair to 80,000 people in Illinois unemployed who just lost their unemployment benefits because of the Republican filibuster. Why do the Republicans oppose this bill? Well, the good reason, they say, is the deficit. But let me tell you the real reason. The real reason is because this bill pays for virtually all the programs except unemployment by making changes in the tax code, changes which the Republicans object to.
What do you make of it, Dean?
Well, I think he's absolutely right. And, it's really sort of an incredible story here because, again, we were talking a moment ago about the banks. There's no doubt, had it not been for the government coming in to bail them out, Citigroup is out of business today. Goldman Sachs is out of business today. Morgan Stanley is out of business today, without a doubt. No one could seriously tell you otherwise. Yet there they are, making, the people running them tens of millions a year in wages, the hugely profitable companies. Now we have workers who are unemployed, not because they're lazy, not because they lack the skill. These people are unemployed because people like Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan didn't know how to do their jobs. So you have these people who are suffering, and, our Congress, again, it's mostly Republicans, most of the Democrats are voting the right way, but nonetheless, at the end of the day, these people can't even get, $300 a week in unemployment benefits. That's about 3 minutes pay for someone at Goldman Sachs.
What will this do to inequality, the subject of that issue?
Well, it's not a good story. I mean, we've had enormous growth in inequality over the last 3 decades, and I would argue much of it by conscious policy. And I don't know if this counts as conscious policy, but certainly we do know how to get the unemployment rate down, and we're not doing it. And as a purely practical matter, when there's 10% unemployment, it's very hard for most workers to be in a position to push up their wages. They're very happy just to have a job. So, if they're not keeping pace with inflation, their wages aren't keeping pace with inflation, there's not a lot they could do about that. And this is well documented. I've done some work on this. My friend Jared Bernstein has done this with me, that you could very well show that when there's higher unemployment, those who are less well off, say those without college degrees, tend to take the biggest hit, not just in terms of being more likely to be unemployed, but when they are working, they get lower wages.
Dean Baker for the Center for Economic and Policy Research and The Nation magazine. Thanks for joining us. People can find that special issue on the stands July 1st.